Hi, I'm Cassandra, and this is Tori, and this is our third episode of What's on Your Mind podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about conflict and the four horsemen that are a part of the Gottman Method. Uh, to start off, the four horsemen include criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. One thing that I found really interesting, Tori, and I know we were talking about this, was
Yes, it's coming back to me now. Yep.
is it going back? Okay, good. Is that the Gottmans describe criticism and contempt as the weapons and the defensiveness and stonewalling as the shields. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really, really great visual of people's arguments. And so when we see couples, these are the things we're looking out for. I will take the first two, Tori, if you want
Sure, go for it.
the second two.
Yeah,
Um,
you got it.
so criticism and contempt. Criticism is basically a one partner responding to another partner and what it sounds like criticizing something that they're doing or
Hmm.
not doing. And uh, I basically it's like named calling, such as like
Yeah.
laziness or lazy, you're dumb, you're selfish, you never do this kind of language. And it can really shut down the other partner pretty quickly. It's why we call it a weapon, right? Because it's
That's
pretty
right. Yeah,
effective.
exactly.
Um, Whereas contempt is what the Gottmans have labeled as the most corrosive of the four horsemen. It's pretty much the nail in the coffin as far
That's
as
right.
relationships go. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you are noticing contempt, that your relationship's over. It just means that it is something to be aware of. It is a more amped up version of criticism. It's more bullying, more abusive language. It can be verbal and nonverbal. So
Hmm.
nonverbal might look like rolling your eyes, huffing and puffing,
Hmm.
um, that kind of verbal language, and then or nonverbal language, and then
Yep.
verbally, it's things again like "you're stupid," "I can't believe you
Putting
did
your partner
this."
down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of tearing down instead of building up, which is not
Exactly.
something we want to do. Anything you want to add with that?
Um, well, like you said, contempt's the biggest predictor of divorce or relationship breakdown. I like see it as like a power differential where you're like looking
Mhm.
down on your partner from a position of power, where like you are acting as if like you know more better than the other person. Certainly that's like really disrespectful. It's almost like a disdain for your partner. I have seen contempt typically occur more often in folks where their needs have gone unmet for a period of time. It's
Right.
not something that just comes out at the outset where that would be more criticism.
Yeah.
So that all-encompassing language like you and never, always, never, that type of thing. Criticism is something that is like deep-seated in resentment, right? And so for obvious reasons, I think it's clear that it's the biggest predictor of relationship breakdown. So no, I think you summed it up well. I think
Thank you.
it's clear what it is. I do think it's important for people to know what the antidotes are. Do you want to talk a little bit about those for the two horsemen you're covering?
Sure, can do. So a lot of the antidotes center around how we then approach the conversation or the argument rather. And that is using I feel statements and moving away from you statements, moving towards what you need and voicing that in a calm, gentle way instead
Yeah.
of bulldozing your way in and taking over the conversation. And it's really just, I promise you, just going to shut down your partner. And you're never going to get what you need out of the conversation because the tone of the argument has taken such a dark turn. Um,
That's becoming like the focus, right? Is the how you're talking to me versus what you're saying to me.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a big part of it is Well, really, like what the Gottman say, how a conversation starts is predictive of how it will end, right? So if you come into it a bit more gentle, like you're saying, odds are you're going to be heard and understood far greater than if you were to come in really hot and come like a bull in a china shop. You're not going to get very much out of your partner, right? So how you speak to each other is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, and another, like what I usually do, and I'm sure you do it too, with clients is helping them restructure how they're talking to each other,
Mhm.
specifically how they're taking turns listening and speaking,
Mhm.
reflecting a lot of compassion towards their partner, really trying to hear what their partner is saying, and also taking accountability and ownership of their own mistakes, which isn't always an easy thing to do. Uh,
Not at all.
especially if you're a right fighter. I think you make it more difficult. Uh, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think maybe just one thing around contempt. What could take it to the next level is really fostering more fondness and admiration in the relationship. Just making sure that you guys are calling each other out on the good stuff, like what's going well. If you're more likely to be able to foster those positive feelings and thoughts about your partner more readily, you're less likely to go to that contemptuous place, right? Like if I love my partner and I know they love me, I'm going to give them more benefit of the doubt, right? So if they screw up, they say something or they do something I don't like, well, I'm less likely to go, oh, they're out to get me. I can't believe them, or,
Right.
oh, right? Like sighing and contempt. I'm more likely to attribute maybe some other factor to what they're doing. Like maybe they had a hard day or they were in a rush. That's why they did this thing the way they did it. They're not out to get me type thing.
Right.
So yeah, no, I think you did well. I think you covered that nicely.
Thank you. I also like to add kind of what we were talking about in the previous episodes of that's why making those deposits into your love bank account is so important too, is if you're doing that, I would assume you're probably more likely to be apt to want to be kind to your partner
Yeah,
and see them in a positive light like you were describing.
exactly. Yep, I love that visual, that emotional bank account.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so should I go into the next one?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So defensiveness. Defensiveness is probably exactly what you're thinking about when you hear it. It's that counterattack, right? So if I'm being told I'm so messy, well, you're disgusting, right? Like it's just like a tit for tat, back and forth, volleying the ball over the net. No one's listening. We got two speakers, right? And it's just gonna get worse. It's gonna get heated until someone shuts down or walks away. Oftentimes, people are saying things that they regret when they're in this state of mind. So certainly, it's not helpful. So what we want to do instead is we do want to take responsibility for our part in it. Like Cassandra was saying, is quite challenging at times. So if for using the example, you're so messy, if my partner said that to me, if I was going to follow the antidote and take some responsibility, I could say, well, you know what? I do have a tendency of leaving my like water glasses on the nightstand. I can own that. I'm not owning the whole messy comment, but I am owning the part that I believe I've contributed to. And typically, what that does in that person who was critical to begin with, it brings them right down because they feel seen, they feel heard. Do they do a great job at communicating it? No, they could have done better. They could have used what Cassandra said around the gentle startup, using I language instead. They didn't. We screw up. It's going to happen. That's okay. It doesn't mean that the other person then has to retaliate in a defensive way, right? So hopefully that makes sense. A lesser known example of the defensive response is what we call the innocent victim defensive response. And this is again negating responsibility, but it's kind of like just throwing your hands up in the air and absolving yourself of the situation. So like if my partner's saying you're so messy, if I'm using this innocent victim response, I could say, well, I guess I can't do anything right. I guess I can't keep a clean home. I'm flawed. There's something wrong with me, which is not what your partner's saying, right? They just want you to take ownership for your part in it, right? So defensiveness and criticism, they're just not helpful. They just breed that further conflict. Anything you want to say about defensiveness before I go into stonewalling?
Yeah, just that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed it as well, when you're dealing with couples and there is an element of defensiveness, it, I always like to point out that it tends to look like their argument tends to look like they're having two different conversations. And
Yeah.
because
Two speakers, right? No
yeah,
one's listening.
exactly.
Both
And
people just want to be heard so badly.
exactly, yep. And so I think that describing it like that has really helped my clients in particular understand why it's important to listen, because at this point you're having two separate conversations. Nobody's hearing anything, and the
We're
defensive,
not going to get anywhere good.
yeah, no.
Yeah, exactly. I think what that also involves is a little bit of yielding, like kind of sidestepping, right? I'm going
Yeah,
to listen, I'm going to sidestep so that you can speak, and I'm really going to listen to you. I'm going to attune to what you're saying so then you feel heard. And then once you feel heard, now it's my turn.
yeah,
And hopefully you'll hear me because I gave you the opportunity, right? So someone has to sidestep, someone has to yield and
yeah,
be the listener, right? Now, of course, if you're in a relationship with someone you love, we'd hope that you'd want to do that. You'd want your partner to feel heard and understood, especially if you know it's going to be reciprocated.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool. Good stuff. All right. Next one. We're flying through these. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is when you're so physiologically overwhelmed that you are shutting down. So it looks like you're a stone wall. You're physically present, but no one's really behind the eyes.
Yeah,
So for the person who's trying to get through the person who's stonewalling, they aren't going to get anywhere because there's no one there. No one's home. It's like talking to a wall, right? We all know that's super frustrating. It's probably going to cause escalation in that person who wants to be heard. Now, on the other end, it's equally terrible, I'd say, for the person who's so physiologically overwhelmed that they've now shut down, right? Like that's got to be brutal to be that overwhelmed that like you're not there. Brutal, right? So what we want to do, we want to see how we need to be aware that we're shutting down, right? We need to be aware that this stonewalling is coming on, like the overwhelmed feelings coming on. So if you find yourself climbing that ladder of overwhelm, it's really important to catch yourself, right? And so how do we do that? Well, we got to look for cues within ourselves that that's happening. So maybe it's palms are sweating, maybe it's racing thoughts, maybe it's a tightness in your shoulders or something. And those are all really good indicators that you need a bit of a pause from the conversation to calm down, to self-soothe, and to come back with a clear mind, and be able to access your full brain. Because when you're in that physiologically overwhelmed state, you don't have access to the full brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is right here behind the forehead where all the higher functioning takes place. So for that reason alone, it is far better to call a break than to continue
definitely.
in said conversation. So that's the antidote, is take a break. Now I have quite a bit to say about what that break looks like, because I think a lot of viewers would be like, okay, hold on a second. What about like coming back to it then? How long is this break? How do I know they're gonna come back, right? And I see this with a lot of my clients, and after I explain it, I think it does make a lot of sense. The Gottmans talk about taking 20 minutes to 24 hours. So we're kind of putting bookends on this time. So that 20 minutes is really allowing you that time to self-soothe if you need it, to process what you're feeling, to gain access to the full brain, and to be an active participant. Now, on the other end, it's good to cap it because typically there's this pursuer distancer dynamic between couples, within couples rather, where one person does need that time to self-soothe, but then the other person really wants to be able to resolve things right away. They want to come right back to it and talk about it, right? So by capping it, we know that that person who really wants to talk about it and work through it, it's going to happen within this timeline, right? And the Gottmans really do suggest using that 24 hours as just like a worst case scenario type thing. And in more cases, wanting to utilize an hour or two right? We don't want to kick the can down the road. We don't want to procrastinate. We really want to just get that time to self-soothe, and then let's get the ball rolling here again, right? Like, let's work through this so that we're not wasting really valuable time, because that's what it is. We're not connecting then during this time. We're not engaging with each other in any kind of meaningful way. So breaks are important. Yeah. What else do I want to say? In terms of who comes back, like how do we come back to the conversation? I say the person who calls the break is the one to come back to the conversation. In theory, they're the one who's overwhelmed. So they're the ones who's, calling that agency. I need a break. Okay, well then if you're the one who needs the break, you're the one who has to come back. I think that's fair, especially if they're not able to tell their partner when they're coming back. The other person doesn't know. All they know is that those limits, right? They only know the 20 minutes to 24 hours. So it's helpful if the person who calls the break comes back. That way, the other person isn't wondering, oh, should I go knock on their door? Should I go ask them if they're okay? And they want to talk yet? Let them come to you. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. I would
Yeah.
also add that when you are trying to self-soothe, like if you are the individual that is stonewalling,
Mm-hmm.
to not only pay attention to those early cues, like you were saying, but also having some sort of effective self-soothing
Mm.
eyes. And one thing that I did read or see recently that was from
Yep.
Gottman's, they mentioned that outside of the argument or outside of the disagreement, whatever you want to call it, to work on self-soothing as a couple, as like deep breathing, some sort of meditation. So when one person is stonewalling, the other partner can say, honey, it seems like you're overwhelmed, it seems like you're flooded. Should we take a break? Would you like to, uh, do a meditation or do some deep breathing? And that can actually be like a grounding person for the individual that is stonewalling and help them process through that overwhelm.
Yeah, that would be like really ideal, of
Sure.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds really great. But I do like the point just in general about knowing how to self-soothe, because we want to make sure that that break is utilized effectively. We don't want that break to just be used as time that's passing by and you're overwhelmed and you're ruminating and
Yeah.
whatever has caused you to escalate to begin with, right? Because then it's not really a break then. You're not self-soothing.
No.
And you actually might get even more frustrated and escalated instead of calming down. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Excellent points.
So that's, I think that's stonewalling. So contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Yeah. Which ones do you see the most recently?
Oh, that's a good question. Fortunately, I see contempt the least. So that's nice. But I work with a wide variety of folks, right? From premarital to people who've been married for 25, 30 years. So the whole gamut. But least is contempt. So that's good. Lots of criticism, lots of defensiveness. Like as I'm talking to couples about it, they're like, yep, that's me. Yep, I do that. I fall in that trap sometimes. But stonewalling happens a lot too. A
Mm.
lot, a lot. I see that pursuer distancer dynamic all the time, where one person needs more time to self-soothe, the other person wants to figure it out right away, and they don't know how they can both get their needs met.
Yeah.
And I think taking an effective break really does that. So, yeah, that's a really vague way of answering your question. But what do you think? What are you seeing?
I see something similar. I would say I I see contempt less, thankfully.
Good,
Similarly,
good.
like to you. I'm glad I don't, because that's a hard session when you see
It's a
that,
tough one.
because obviously it's, hard to watch that. But yeah, criticism is a biggie. I see criticism paired with defensiveness.
All
Those
the
are just
time.
like they're holding hands,
That's right. They go part and
they go hand in
parcel.
hand all the time. I would also say that the stonewalling is pretty big as well, and having to try to explain to the person that maybe isn't stonewalling that the person that isn't trying to necessarily avoid the conversation. There might be an element of it. However, them saying, I need a break is not them saying, I don't want to talk about this anymore, I'm avoiding it. Again, there can be an element of that. However,
Yes.
a lot of the times it is just that this other person is overwhelmed and needs a minute. And it's not some sort of criticism or dismissal of the other person's feelings or experience. And that can be kind of a hard thing for, again, the partner that isn't stonewalling to understand. That's kind of what I see with when it comes to stonewalling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what you were saying in regards to the emotional bank account ties in really well with that. Like, if their bank account isn't doing so hot, these four horsemen typically are more prevalent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, less so if you feel loved and appreciated and your needs are being met. Like, people are less likely to go to that dark place quickly. It takes them a lot longer to get there. And there's a lot more I don't know if I want to say willingness, maybe willingness to come back to the conversation. Let's work this out. Let's repair it.
Well, and I think it goes back to that trust element. The more you trust your partner, the more you trust that they're going to be accepting of you when you do come back, it's easier to come back to that conversation.
I agree. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. You have a question for us, right?
We have a couple questions. So one of the questions was from a lovely caller via via Facebook. Uh, and the initial question was kind of broken into two segments or parts.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go with the easier segment first to break that down and then go into her other question. So her first
Perfect.
question was, how do I support my friend? Is there anything I can do for my friend? And so that's kind of an easy summarization of what she was asking for herself. A more complicated, on the more complicated end, was what she was seeing with her friend. And her friend is in a long-term committed relationship with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend wants to get married. She also wants to get married. They have a 5-year plan that they are very committed to. They all, they're very in agreement with how they want things to go. However, as she's gotten closer to wanting to get engaged, he's, from her perspective, apparently has seemed pretty ambivalent about it. He's not taking steps to save up for a ring. He's not doing anything that would indicate to her, apparently, that he's on the same page still.
Mm-hmm.
Fact, she points out that he is spending a lot of his money on big gaming consoles and other big dollar purchases that could have gone towards a ring and eventually a marriage or a wedding, rather.
Right, right.
So that's kind of the big issue for her. She's confused on whether he's really wanting this relationship, whether he's wanting to take that next step and just isn't telling her. And so she doesn't know what to do. She also mentions not wanting to give an ultimatum, but wondering whether saying, okay, I'd like to be married or engaged in 3 months' time, is that an ultimatum or is that just a boundary? And so then going back to the original individual who called in, she
Yep.
wants to know why or how she can help. So,
Her friend who's in this
yes,
dilemma.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we can take the easy part first
Sure.
if you want.
Sure.
Um, my opinion for the friend, and we have to preface this with we are therapists, we're not your therapist. So
Disclaimer.
disclaimer. So please just keep that in mind. We
Grain
don't
of salt.
Yeah, we've never met these people. I don't
Don't
know.
know the whole
Yeah,
story at all.
exactly. 100%. I have no idea. We're just going based on a call.
Third party's perspective.
Third party perspective. So again, take it with a grain of salt. So, but for the caller, I would say one, there's really not much you can do.
I know that's hard to hear.
Yeah, unfortunately, sorry. What you can do is be supportive of your friend. Let
Yep.
her know that you're there for her. Let her
Yep.
know, you can even let her know that you're concerned that, hey, you seem to want this next step. He doesn't seem to want this next step. You've brought this up as a concern for you. I'm worried. You can encourage her to go to therapy. You can encourage her to take both of them to couples therapy and work
Mm-hmm.
through that. But unfortunately, as far as what you can actively do, that is where it ends. What do you say?
I agree with you. I think it's limiting what the friend can do.
Yeah.
I think as a friend, you want to be a really good listener. You
Mhm.
want to like make sure your friend feels understood by you.
Yeah.
So like empathizing, validating, all of that good stuff. Like that's your role as
Right.
friend. Outside of that, you can't make her do anything. You don't want to make her do anything. You can't change anything between her and her partner. um yeah, it is quite limiting. So I would focus on what you can do, which is that supportive piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the other side, the more complicated side, what does the person who's experiencing this do?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I want to start with the fact that having a boundary or having an expectation, maybe is a better term for it, is not an ultimatum.
Right.
So saying, hey, I would like a ring in 3 months is not, and
It's
maybe,
expressing a need.
right. Maybe, yeah, I was going to say, maybe that's not, you wouldn't agree with that, but I personally don't think that that's an ultimatum. I think that that's an expectation. Whether he does it is up to him. He can
That's right.
decide to not do that, but that also gives you a very clear answer of, okay, either we need to renegotiate, we need to talk this through more, or maybe you need to go your separate ways. But it needs to be a conversation. And it sounds like maybe you guys are not on the same page of what that looks like. Also, financially, I would be curious to know if they had that conversation of what it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
For all this is why I feel like it's a little more difficult to answer because we're not talking to them.
No,
So
we don't have enough
for all we
information.
know, the guy has a secret account that he's been saving
You
up,
have no idea.
you know.
No idea
Um, but clearly it's bothering her enough
that
that
she's telling her friend about it.
well, that too,
Yeah.
and then she's questioning whether he's even on the same page. So if you're that far into it, then you definitely need to have a conversation about what your needs are and what this relationship is going to look like. Tori?
I agree. I think, well, first off, just to say that they hold on, I had it on the tip of my tongue. I was trying to listen to what you were saying, so I was gotta put that over there. I gotta listen to you. Um that like I'm glad to hear that they had a 5-year plan. Like that's pretty
Yeah,
cool in itself. Like it
great.
sounds like they had a nice intentional conversation where they were discussing what their needs were. It sounded like they were on the same page. Um, I think it's appropriate to come back and check in, especially as time goes on. Things change, things evolve, right? And maybe you realize that it actually wasn't as clear as you thought it was, right? Speaking about finances, like maybe she thinks he should be saving every nickel and dime, where for him, perhaps like maybe he doesn't think it needs to be that expensive, or
Right.
maybe he's already got some saved away and she doesn't know about it, like you said, right? Like, of course, I'd want this person to give their partner the benefit of the doubt, first of
Yeah.
all. Like, let's not jump to like worst case scenario that he just doesn't care and
Yeah.
isn't adhering to the thing that they decided together. I wouldn't go there off the bat. But
Especially,
certainly it sounds like the two of them do need another conversation just to make sure that they're on the same page.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially since there's been no
Pardon
indicators
me.
that he's not in the relationship, right? As 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 long as he's an active participant in the relationship and is trying, then there shouldn't be a need to jump to the conclusion of, oh,
Exactly.
he's not in this.
Yeah, no, I don't think that would do anyone good going to that negative
No.
place off the bat.
You're definitely going
Um,
to activate some four horsemen on that one. Some
exactly.
defensiveness.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. So I would say have a conversation, give benefit of the doubt, approach the conversation with an open mind. Let's not be critical when you bring it up. Just like I feel, I think, right? I see. So like I see you buying these consoles. I feel scared that we're not on the same page. I'm worried we're not on the same page. I need to know that we're on the same page. And the page I want to be on is this. This is what I need, right? Like I need to know that we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. That's going to increase that person's likelihood of feeling heard. Hopefully, their partner doesn't get defensive or shut down because they're going into it really calmly. If they do, of course, you can take a break and come back to it. It is a big topic, right? It's a heavy topic. It's your life we're talking about, right? Like we're not talking about the dishes here, um, which we talk about a lot in therapy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's a very long-winded way of saying have a conversation.
Yep. Yeah. And I would say if you get to a wall in the discussion, going to therapy would be your next step.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Yep,
The
sounds
therapist,
good.
go to therapy.
Oh my gosh, yeah, therapists go to therapy. We all go to therapy. We all need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that was a great question. I hope we get more questions, right? It really facilitates our conversations and helps us help others, really.
Exactly. All right, Tori. Anything else you want to add
Okay.
to this episode, or shall we go
I don't
over?
think so. We covered the four horsemen. We answered a question. I think we should cut it there and we'll continue to talk about conflict in subsequent episodes. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds wonderful.
Wonderful. Okay, until next time.
Bye, everyone.